Hello, this is Lance. Welcome to SHL Fireside Chat. I'm back again with my colleague and friend Renee Barr. How are you doing, Renee?
Hanging in there, Lance. How are you?
Yeah, I think that's the common answer. Hanging in there is definitely a good way of describing it. But I'm glad we're back. This is our intention, was to talk to people that have stories to tell and information to kind of build a community around talent matters that are affecting us all in this new reality. So one of the first people we reached out to was Maya. We'll introduce her in a moment. Maya works at BetterUp and has some really interesting data to share, and I'm really excited that she's here. Maya has a background in industrial and organizational psychology and has a kind of a broad career of working on a number of talent-related organizational effectiveness and human capital related issues. Maya, you can probably do yourself a better introduction, so I'll turn it over to you. Maya, introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Lance, and thank you, Lance and Renee, for having me. I'm excited to talk to everyone. As Lance mentioned, I'm the Regional Vice President for Behavioral Science at BetterUp, and what that means is I lead a team of folks who partner with our clients and prospects to help bring to life the science and the power of what BetterUp does. We help lead organizations through transformation. Our mission is to have every individual live their lives with clarity, purpose, and passion. That is sometimes a very audacious goal, and especially really hard in this day and age. But we do that in some very powerful ways, one of which is through a lot of one-on-one coaching and organizational transformation at scale, through coaching at scale. And so we have insights into what people are really doing right now and how they're going through the current situation, how they're managing through the chaos and the stress. So I'm excited to share a little bit of that with you and what folks are doing.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining. And like you mentioned, you have actual data, and that's one of the things that we're excited to hear. And so I think we can jump right into it. The reason that I first reached out was after seeing an infographic, something around COVID-19 and the state of the worker, and it has some really good information from a good amount of data and with some interesting findings. So Maya, just want to maybe tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your data.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of to set the stage, there's kind of, we do two things at BetterUp. Well, we do more than two things at BetterUp, but two things in terms of like the data that I'll talk about. So just to clarify, so I sit in a broader organization within BetterUp Labs. And within BetterUp Labs, we both support our prospects and our partners, and we bring to life like the data that's at play in their organization, so what's happening, what people are doing. But we also at Labs, and I have colleagues who do a lot of this work, is we do some of our own novel research as well, and we collect data from other places, even outside of our members. And so one of the things that we did like immediately as COVID was happening, because we instantly saw the way that our own members, these are the people who are going through like the BetterUp coaching and the learning programs, we saw that there was a change in how they were reacting, how they were experiencing the world around them. And this led us to do kind of two things. One is start looking even more deeply at what was going on with those folks. And then we also wanted to understand a little bit more kind of what is the state of the worker in general, whether you're a BetterUp member or not. And so actually in March, pretty much right around when COVID-19 went really big cross country, we launched a study. And we asked a little over 2,000 US workers questions about work, about life, about stress, about coping, and about their thoughts of the future in this kind of post-COVID-19 reality. So with that group, what we saw was just fascinating. And it gave us this kind of glimpse into what people are really feeling and experiencing. And so we found out, gosh, people are sleeping worse. So on average, there's a 14% reduction in people's sleep quality. They're being less active, as you might imagine, right? So you're sitting at home, you're no longer going to the gym, you're right? Maybe that was your built-in excuse, Lance. It was like, I didn't want to go to that gym anyway. But workers are 21% less active than before. And they are, on the whole, really worried about the future. So people are feeling pessimistic about what the next 6 months have in store. And that is telling us a little bit about their psyche and how they're showing up at work and how they're showing up at their families. So that was kind of like this initial take. And we went kind of a level deeper, right? Because it's like as psychologists, as scientists, as people who are like naturally curious, we said, well, we have more information at our fingertips. Is there anything else that's nuanced here? And one of the things that I'm looking at Renee, because I think you'll kind of feel this with me a little bit, is we found that there was actually a pretty drastic difference between how men and women are experiencing this as well. So women's sleep quality, and I'll let you all infer like why this is the way it is, but women's sleep quality has suffered 28% more than men's, right? So on average, we're all doing way worse in terms of our sleep, but women are suffering significantly more in that regard. And women have also experienced twice as much of a drop in workplace social support than men. So if you can imagine like what you had before, like it has just decreased twice as much. And so that is harder for individuals to cope with, and particularly women. So that's kind of the initial take and what we found.
It's so, I mean, and all of it is kind of what we would expect and what you're hearing, like, reading, articles about what to expect from like a mental health perspective, and expecting to feel more stressed, expecting to feel more fatigued, expecting to sleep less, but actually seeing it in live or hearing about it in live data from your users, there's something about that somehow makes it more real than an article in like a major newspaper that seems abstract, or and something that almost makes it hit home, I guess, in a bit of a different way. It's challenging what everyone is going through right now.
Yeah. When you say the drop in social support, what are some examples of like what types of support are they not getting, or people in general, and then especially women? What does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. So it could be things as simple as like, are you connecting in the same way with the colleagues that you had before, or in a way that feels supportive to you? Do you feel like you have someone that you rely on at work that you can go and talk to? So it changes person to person, but certainly women are feeling like they're lacking that. They're not getting as much of it as they used to.
Yeah,
and like, as you kind of,
go ahead, Renee.
Oh, I was just going to say, as you kind of alluded to, Maya, like there could be all kinds of reasons for that. Don't want to make over assumptions or stereotypes, but you can think like, is it that women are typically providing a lot of that input into the system from like emotional, social support, and then when all of this is going on, everybody on their own has other things that are keeping them from doing as much as they normally do, which kind of lowers all the boats in the pond? Or is it something about a mental state where people don't have the emotional reserves to be offering what it is? How much of it could be perception versus reality? I mean, there's so many interesting things there that you want to kind of like dig into that we don't know.
And one of the things that comes to mind too is if we think about like what's been one of the biggest like physical changes for people is they went from, in many instances, I think you and I were kind of unique in this situation where I think all of us used to work from home even before this happened. Maybe Lance, you might be a little unique in that you were in an office, but like I worked from home, so I already had like my process and infrastructure for how I connected. But for all of those individuals who didn't used to work from home, they were in an office and had some of these like natural interactions and ways that they connected with others. Now going into an environment where you are at home, maybe in a very different kind of work situation and setup, you don't have some of that same lunchtime routine or your morning chat or even the walk to the meeting. So those things are lost for a lot of folks, and it's now kind of recreating some of that social connection. So one of the big things that we're doing a lot right now is actually with our partners, helping folks learn how do you now work from home. So we are doing a lot of sessions around what does it mean to work from home and what does it mean to maintain social connection in this kind of environment. So I think there is an aspect potentially of that as well.
Yeah, it's like as you were saying that, I was thinking, so I've worked from home for about the last 10 years, but under normal situations, I go into like one of our main headquarter offices about once every 4 to 6 weeks at least. And one of the things I just noticed there is when I'm in the office, meetings are happening in rooms. So I'm getting up almost every half hour or every hour. I'm chatting with the people who, on, like you said, on the way there, on the way back. There's kind of these natural breaks in between work where both physically and mentally I'm turning it down a little bit. Whereas in this situation, when you're working from home, I mean, it's really just call to call, meeting to meeting, and you're jumping right from one thing into another, and you don't tend to nearly have I wonder if even those almost micro breaks really start to make a difference, especially if you're not used to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those people that's not used to it. Just the change in scenery sometimes too, right? For me, going to different conference rooms, different meeting rooms, popping into someone's desk, like those almost forms memories better a little bit too. So I've been trying to do that a little bit myself, moving to different places or different types of calls, and that helps just vary it up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then like right now, if you do have a few minutes in between a meeting or whatnot, you're just as likely, instead of maybe having that little bit of downtime for a few minutes, you're running off to see like what's happening with like the Prodigy math thing and what was that like noise I heard over there, and does somebody need help with homework? At least for not everyone has kids, of course, but for those of us who do, is there anything about that the dynamic of people's like family home situations that you're seeing in what your coaches and your data is showing you, Mariah?
Yeah, so I know we talked a little bit about this, so I can share even some data visually as well with you. But one of the things that we found is, one, of everyone that we coach, and it's thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but in the US specifically, 60% of people had this massive change of going from being in an office to now working from home. So 60% of people had that change. And now we don't know how many people were already working from home, so they might not have experienced that change, but they're there. And now they're there with very different office mates than they had before. And that's creating a lot of stress for people. So if you'll allow me, bear with me for a second, I'll share a screen with you here quickly that I think might shed some light on this. And I think it's absolutely just fascinating what's going on with folks. And this will kind of give you a sense of what's happening with people in general. So of course, as you know, like you can't multitask and do things at the same time. So let me share that. And you guys give me a thumbs up when you see it. But this is, great, thank you. So this is actually a picture of two little boys. It's one of my colleagues who, these are her two sons, and she shared this. I don't know if you all have something like this. We internally have a Slack channel where it's like a family and kids channel, and we have a lot of these pictures of what's going on right now. And she said, I was in a conference call, and they dumped every box of Legos during that period of time. And she was just like going, oh my God, every box of Legos. And so like take that picture and overlay that into the data that we actually have, which tells us, like in the study that we ran that I was talking about, is that for parents working from home, kids are the most stressful part of their workday if they're in the home with them, right? And so it's like, if you think about everything that could be stressing you out, if you are co-working with your little human beings, they are going to outmatch like any customer, any technology, any coworker, or even boss issues that you have. They are the most stressful thing for you. And it's pretty drastic, right? And what's funny on there is, like, you can see spouses, they're kind of tipping up there. So if your spouse is there, they're borderline, they're getting to you a little bit. But yeah, so having kids at home is stressful. Now on the left, like, these are the folks who are now working from home, but they don't have kids in their home environment. They might have them, they're adults, or they're just not there with them. And so you see, like, it's almost like it's a non-issue for them, right? It's like, it's the customers, it's the technology, the boss, like they're their biggest stressors. And so this is a little bit of an insight of like, what are people really dealing with? And how does that then play out for them in their day-to-day? It's like this added layer of complexity, of emotional energy that you're working through. Now, it gets a little bit interesting, and this is where we do find it rather fascinating. So if you look at, and I can't tell, are you guys still seeing my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to go on to the next slide here. So this is, it gets really interesting in this regard because there's that mix of stressors for people, but what we found is no matter what your mix is, people with kids at home versus people without kids at home actually have pretty similar levels of stress. So we don't want to walk away and say, oh gosh, it's really the parents who are struggling the most. Not the case at all. People are about equally experiencing stress, and everyone's stress has gone up. And so you kind of have to look under the hood there a little bit and say, well, how is it that these groups are managing their stress differently? Like what's going on there? And that's where we can really learn a lot about the different types of people we have and how they manage to cope and process the world around them. And so this, I love this. So what we found is when we unpackaged this data a little bit more, there are these key differences in mindsets and beliefs, even in the activities of working parents, that might help us explain how they're really able to almost like absorb this additional surging source of stress in their life. Their kids, right? I mean, we love our kids. We all love our kids, but it is hard. And they're still able to maintain that kind of parallel level of stress. So what we think and what this data, oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, please.
Question. I was going to dig into it a little bit more, but feel free to stop me. So this is what we think through this data that we collected is working parents, we believe, might be more psychologically prepared for change and uncertainty. And I think all of us are here, parents on the call. Gosh, if you're a dog parent and you or an animal parent, you've kind of dealt with, if you have the barking on the line, like we just said, I had to put my dog in another room. Can't lock the kids up in the same way. Okay. Like parents deal with the change and uncertainty all the time. So they're more resilient. They have stronger coping skills. Maybe they're more optimistic about the future. We also found that working parents actually share that they have stronger bonds with their companies. So they're more likely to feel accepted at and included by their company. They have stronger beliefs that their company cares about their personal well-being, perhaps due to the increased adoption of family-friendly policies that we're seeing. I know for us at Better Up, it really helps that like we talk in our channels, like we have a kids channel and a families channel about like posting the crazy pictures and going, hey, you got this, or here's another idea for how you can keep your kids occupied, or, you know, here's instructions on how to put a new lock on your door, whichever. Like having that support of the company matters. And finally, though physical activity levels for both groups, like parents, non-parents, for everyone has really dropped off with COVID-19, the drop-off is actually less steep for working parents. And maybe it's because of that, like we have to do activities with our kids. Like me, I'm outside more now with my kids because I have to get them out. I need to run off that energy with them. So families have started exercising together, and that's where we see kind of these nuances coming through.
As I was looking at the list, one of the things I was wondering about, thinking about the resiliency and the optimism, maybe especially as part of it is, on the one hand, like having the kids in this work environment creates extra stress. But the fact that given that we're all social distancing, if you have kids, that means you have people inside your bubble that you're social distancing with. And so while they may be driving you a little bit nuts, they're also people you can hug and people you can talk to and hang out with. Whereas folks without kids, you don't know if they have roommates or if they have a partner, or maybe they're, you know I have colleagues who are single individuals who've been, self-isolating for weeks now. And I think that's a different kind of stress. They may not have the overwhelming of kids going on and everything going crazy, but there's also not the human element that like we're social beings. And I wonder if that kind of starts to play a role sometimes where we kind of focus more on the, right now, understandably, on the challenges that come along with being 3, 4, 5 people stuck in a house together, but don't always focus on the support that comes from having a small tribe rather than being more on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's certainly something to that. I mean, as human beings, we are social creatures. It's like, this is why we talk about, like, and one of the things, like, I had a colleague who actually said this, and I thought it was just absolutely phenomenal. And she said, you know, we are talking about social distancing, but what we really need to be talking about is physical distance. Like, we need to create physical distance with others, but we absolutely have to maintain the social connection, because actual social distancing is where a lot of the psychological trauma can come into play.
Right.
And that's where people suffer the most. I mean, if you think about, I don't have research on this, but like, just as a layman, like, what do we do with individuals who are incarcerated? Like, the worst possible punishment is to isolate someone, to isolate them from other people. So like, this idea, Renee, that you're talking about is like, yes, our kids are stressful, but they are truly our support. And if you don't have that, it is very hard to not have that continued connection with others.
And just as you were saying that, when you're talking about, you know, that quote around social distancing or physical distancing versus social distancing, I wonder if one of the things, almost maybe one of those coping skills that parents might have come into the situation with a bit more is, I think one of the things that tends to happen when you have kids, especially smaller kids, is you can't go out and physically be with your friends as easily as you used to be able to do that. And so you find alternative ways that are often technology mediated to fill that role, because it's like 5-month-old that's keeping you from going out in the world, not COVID. And so maybe foundationally, there was a little bit more of a plan and an outlet for keeping that social connection while creating the physical distance for folks who with kids, whereas folks without kids, I mean, again, I don't have research, but presumably a lot more of their social life could be around physically going places and being with others more easily.
Yep. No, absolutely. Definitely.
And as we're saying this, I'm thinking of like all of the gross overgeneralizations that I'm making. So,
yeah, it's hard not to want to dig in, right? This is as a scientist, but also as a mom and as a practitioner, it's like I'm constantly disentangling, because we are all personally experiencing this so deeply. Is how much of myself am I projecting into some of this versus getting the data and really saying, okay, this is the only thing that we can extrapolate from this based on what we know. And then it gives us the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper and ask some more questions, which is a little bit of kind of what we're starting to do more on the end of looking at our own member data. So like, this was like a study that we ran like immediately, not with our members, but then like it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, we're getting these signals that are, from a broader population. Now let's ask our members some of these more fine-tuned questions and get even more data there too.
And maybe that's a segue. Last week when we were chatting, just kind of getting ready for this, you showed us a preview of some of the visualizations that actually has the member data that Renee and I were both excited with, and it's probably good just to show that with the audience too. Like, what is the actual data saying? How the coaching conversations changed, and what are the differences you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll skip to that and let me know if you're seeing it or not. But so I pulled this slide for you all because I thought it would just be fascinating to share with you guys when we were talking about this. And then you said, oh, I think people like it. And I get it. I love pictures too. And I think something like this is just such a great representation of being able to just look deeply into like what might be happening. And what we see here is the top 10 coaching session topics. So just to kind of like lay the stage here, our coaches, after every session with one of the members that they coach, so a coachee, at the end they'll tag that conversation with 1, 2, maybe 3 topics. Like what was predominantly the individual wanting to focus on, or what did they need help on, or what was of most interest to them. And what we saw here is the topics in March, and on the right is a little bit of the kind of the digest version. And what we saw is that stress management and self-care as a critical topic came up. It like increased in prevalence by almost 80%. Communication and collaboration, as you might imagine, increased by 12%. Balancing work and life increased by just 2%, but it was only one of 3 topics that actually increased in prevalence, right? So the blue are the topics that increased. The orange are the ones that actually decreased. So a lot of conversations, as you might imagine, in coaching are helping people through challenging situations. And we know one of the biggest challenges for individuals at work is difficult conversations. No matter who you are, it's hard to have difficult conversations. But that decreased by almost a third. Career transitions, also a big topic with coaching, decreased by 21%. So you can see like there's this massive shift in what people are needing support with. And you can kind of like, if I overlay when COVID actually happened, like you can see where that shift actually occurred. So like we kind of used March 11th as a cutoff of where like the U.S. Announcement went out and people started to do shelter in place, or discussions of shelter in place happened. And we see that by far that increase in stress management and self-care is the highest increase we've ever seen in our whole Better Up history. And the increase by 80% is pretty huge. So this tells us it was a pretty big event for people. Like it really shifted the dynamic for them at work and in their life, and it kind of disrupted their reality quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm like
you go ahead.
Go ahead, Lance.
I was just going to say, you know, the career-oriented future kind of self-career developmental things are the ones that are going down. So like, you know, in a couple of months or whenever, you know, people start transitioning back to a new normal, whatever that is, what is all these things from the career conversations have been put on hold. And so that's probably worth acknowledging and kind of being prepared for helping people get back and prioritize those. Of course, self-care and stress management do those things too, because that's probably the foundation, but you know, making that a priority for individuals as managers and leaders is probably something like force that, you know, don't forget about yourself, your career.
Right. Exactly. And I do think it will have a rebound effect. And in fact, that we're already seeing niggles of it in pockets. So we did, we kind of looked at, and maybe like kind of giving the cart before the horse is a little bit like, but we are starting to see like people who have kind of lived through several weeks of this, they are starting to report a little bit of increase in well-being. So I'll share kind of some niggles around that. But like showing also too, I think so there's kind of like these different views that you can take. And I thought it was kind of interesting to be able to say, okay, what are coaches saying that people are talking about? But then there's other aspects that I thought might be interesting to show people is what are the resources that they're then assigning people. So again, this is March versus February. And if we think about the kind of the need there is to see like what's the likelihood that a coach would assign, you know, X resource in March versus in February. And obviously we see that, you know, the increase there is around the psychological advantages and disadvantages of working remotely, how to lead from a distance, how remote teams stay connected, like all of those things that we would understand to be really critical for people. It's like, I just need those tools right now for this, like, snap of a finger change that I went through, which is going from office work to remote work. And like not underestimating the psychological challenge of even that, right? Change is hard under normal circumstances, but in a pandemic when like you're worried about life and your family and the health of your relatives across the country, you're also going, how do I now work differently amidst all of this? And so we saw this like big spike in terms of these types of resources. Here's where it gets fascinating. But let me pause and see if you guys have any questions about this before I show you something really cool.
Now I'm too interested in seeing the really cool thing.
Okay, that's great. I got too excited for my own good. So this is where we're starting to see both helping us understand what people have experienced, like what's been like their journey, both emotionally and what they're working on as professionals. So what we did, and my colleague Evan Sinar has actually led a lot of looking at this data, and it's just fabulous to be able to see. So he looked at what are the resources that individuals themselves are searching for, and what are like coaches are searching for and resources for their members to kind of help meet a need. And what he did was actually look at what was it February 3, so like before any of us were really having any sort of serious concerns about COVID. This is kind of what it looked like, and as you can see, you know, coaching, values, leadership, feedback, career, time, like those are the kind of the core things that folks were focused on, as we would expect. And then you see at the bottom are just the niggles of those things that we think are COVID related. But now this is the time view. Like this is going from February all the way into mid-April, right? So like almost now-ish. And this is the change of those search terms, of the things that people were looking for help on. And you could kind of see like that transition. I'll play it again because I think it's that powerful. Like you can see the COVID-related items just starting to rise to the top. They're the yellow ones, and people are talking about resilience, about working remotely, uncertainty, like remote work there spiked at one point. And so you can see how that just changes over time.
Yeah.
And it gives you, again, that glimpse into what's happening. And like you can kind of put that side by side here and see like, okay, this is at the end of the day at week 10, this is what it looked like. So week 10 was, you know, what for us, about like a week and a half ago. This is where we landed, right? So COVID back down at the bottom. I love Renee Brown. She was at the top for for several weeks. I find that fascinating. So definitely has a following. But crisis, virtual, like people have been looking for that support. And I do think like the one that I found the most fascinating is doing the side by side. This is what it was at week 8. So this, to me, like when I was thinking about like what's the height of, right, the epicenter almost of this anxiety. And I thought it was this what we would call week 8, week of March 23rd. I know in California, school closed. In Washington State, where I am, school closed. And people were like, we didn't know what the end would be, but we were feeling pretty anxious. And that's what it looked like then. Like those COVID related search terms were at the top. And now we're week 11, 12 for some of us, and things are starting to normalize a little bit, right? It's just kind of fascinating.
Yeah,
so
you know, it is. It's fascinating, like how, in some ways, how quickly we can bounce back might be too optimistic of a term, but find maybe a new normal, to use another probably like overused phrase. I think what would be really interesting too, I don't know if your data captures this, but if like things like leadership and values and coaching are kind of back up and feedback or in communication are back at the top, kind of like they were before, so broadly conceptually, are those the same, but is the detail underneath, like, has it shifted any given the new situation that people are settled into? And in my mind, the thing that kind of keys off of from a couple of slides ago was where the whole like difficult conversations, you know, kind of dropped off. And one of the things I'd been wondering about, I think in general, and then like seeing your data, is this sense of in this situation, I think it's very easy, the difficult conversations that maybe need to be had, to just not have the energy to have them, for it not to seem the right time, especially if they were maybe conversations you would have had face-to-face versus virtually, for it just to seem like not a priority right now, like other things like shot up to the list. But what potentially is the impact of going weeks or maybe months deprioritizing the difficult stuff? Like, where does that leave you? And then how hard is it to come back out of this time period that we've been maybe pretending those things weren't there? I mean, I just extrapolated, I know, a lot from a couple of ideas, but that's where my brain went.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. Like, it was like there was this kind of couple week period where, I don't know if it's like, if I can say, like, we all gave ourselves the grace to take a step back and say, like, let's really focus on what matters, and let's make sure that we are supporting the well-being of our teams as they are all going through these very challenging times and rethinking their reality. And they need to readjust. And admittedly, like, during that readjustment period, is it right to have that same conversation? Maybe, maybe not. So, like, some of that got put on hold. And also, we talked a lot about, and we talk about this at Better Up, and some of our partners are talking about this with their organization, is, it's this idea of, like, put the oxygen mask on first for yourself, right? Like, make sure that you're good before you can start taking care of others. So there's a little bit of that happening as well. And then as people get through that period, and they do, I think, like you said, Renee, they're discovering a new normal. And maybe it's not a new normal, right? Like, there's nothing we're doing here that's truly normal.
Right.
But we are resilient creatures. We're learning and adapting how we need to interact in our new situation. And as we're figuring that out, some of these things that we know are still important and actually are even more important. Like, imagine the value of communication. We just came off of a webinar that we did for a partner earlier this morning, where we talked about, it's a company that went completely virtual, and they were never, like, no one worked from home. Whole company went, no one working from home to everyone working from home. Like, communication and leadership skills are even more critical when you have that distance, where there's, you're ripe for misinterpretation or for making assumptions. Like, it actually is even more critical to tune into those leadership skills, to be able to give, like, really good, crisp feedback, to align to your own personal kind of leadership values. And so we're seeing that, like, rise up, but in this new context of working remotely.
So fascinating.
It's almost like, there was sorry, I'm having headset issues. Hopefully you can still hear me. I think it should always be the case. It's sad to take something like this to put this at the forefront, but I think leading with empathy and understanding, assuming good intentions, and I think people are, have been doing that more, and, like, assuming that, people have a lot going on. Let's just be understanding and try not to put judgment before we actually think about what's actually going on in people's lives. And that's kind of bled into just how we work with people, and having just more leading with empathy and understanding that, people were really focused on it right away, especially according to the data.
Exactly. And something it's not on this slide, but I was just looking at, we did this pulse with folks recently, just in the last, like, week or so, and we asked them, compared to 2 weeks ago, how is your well-being? And 60% of people said that it's somewhat or much better. So we are seeing that people are rebounding a little bit. Now, what's interesting is we have seen that productivity, people's, like, self-reported productivity, isn't rebounding as much, right? Their well-being is stabilizing, but the productivity not as much. And I think that the reasons for that is something that we've talked about before. Like, if you're not in the kind of work situation where you truly can be as productive, like, it's physically not possible, it's going to take longer for that to figure itself out.
Yeah, physical disruption to work, for sure.
And I was thinking about that, where people, their sense of well-being is rebounding a bit, even though the productivity is not. And what, I don't know that I'm going to successfully go anywhere, but just trying to think about what is it that the well-being sense going up? Like, what's driving that? Is it just habituation to the new situation? Or is it actual better coping with it? There's a lot of interesting stuff in there that, and then when you think about it, like, if there's the potential that it's a mix. I mean, does anything in the data that y'all have when you put it all together, I know I asked this question before and you said you were going to look, so I'm leading a bit, but does it allow you to see if there are kind of individuals whose kind of general behavioral preferences and the way they go about being are more suited to kind of coping with and being successful when their whole company is shifting from not working remotely to remotely? Do you see it kind of playing out where you can see where different kind of styles or work preferences are coming together to show different trajectories for people?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's one that we've been digging into a little bit more in terms of trying to understand how some of these patterns are coming up, and why are some people maybe recovering more than others, or one of the things that we can certainly look at, as I shared, kind of because we can look at at the kind of conversations people are having and what they're leaning into more versus less in their coaching. And one of the things that we actually looked at over the course of several weeks is what can we learn about people from the perspective of the amount of coaching or the kind of coaching that they're looking to get during this time. And what we honed in on is there's actually pretty interesting and very distinct patterns in terms of how some people want to engage in more stress-related coaching versus not doing less or more stress-related coaching. And so I was looking across the patterns there of okay, who are the people who as a result of COVID-19 actually started to do more coaching related to stress and anxiety, and what are the what can we learn about people? Maybe there's a group of people who started to do a lot less in terms of coaching around related to stress. Maybe they leaned into a different kind of coaching. Mm-hmm. And then there were these people who nothing changed for them in terms of how much coaching around stress specifically they sought. And what we found is really interesting. And again, it's early yet. We're going to continue to look at some of these patterns, but it was clear enough to be able to say, wow, there's something really interesting about how people are leaning in. So what we found is there were these three groups of people. So there was this group, and I call them the feelers, the people who are really, they're in touch with their own emotions in a good way, right? They are focusing on more stress-related coaching right now. And these are people who we are finding are higher on emotional regulation, they're higher on self-compassion, they're higher on empathy. So these people, and that's why I was you might see why I call them the feelers. They are, and it's not they're overly or negatively too feely. No, they're just aware of their feelings and what's important for them, and how, what it takes for them potentially to regulate more, to care for themselves, because they know that that's important, and they're certainly demonstrate more empathy towards others, and we know that that can also both be exhausting and give you more, right? So these folks are leaning more towards stress-related coaching. There's this next group who are actually doing less stress-related coaching than they did before, right? So if you just go from their baseline. And what we found is what they have in common is they are the people who are high in strategic planning, in rest, in goal attainment, in focus, and oddly enough, even in authenticity. And these people are, I call them the pragmatists, right? They're the ones who are saying, okay, right now, what I need is not stress-related coaching. What I need right now is something more action-oriented. I'm gonna work on that plan. I'm gonna work on how to help my team through this. I'm gonna work on what's our strategy right now. And they're really honing in on this is given everything that's going on, I need to do more of this. Let me pull back on the stress-related stuff and do more of the really pragmatic, action-oriented coaching. And then there's this third group. These are, I called them the learners, right? They actually had no change from their kind of pre-COVID baseline. They kind of stayed about the same. And these people, interestingly enough, are very high in growth mindset, in problem solving. They're already high in stress management, and they're already high in resilience. So it makes perfect sense that they're the slow and steady. Like they've got this. They know they've got this. They have an open, growth-oriented approach to what's around them. They don't need more or less of the stress-related coaching. They're going to keep going in the path that's necessary for them. So it was a really clear, very fascinating pattern around, how people are leaning in to a different type of coaching.
It kind of underscores that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach for leaders to how to help your team. There's not like, here, this is the playbook for helping everybody. It's different, right? Because you have these people that have higher baseline for coping, that are probably better at tolerating some of the change-related aspects, and others that are in it, feeling it, and immersing in. Others that just, I want to solve the problem, fix it, do what I can to contribute. There's not a one. That's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can leave you guys with one thought, I know we're running kind of towards the end of our time, but this one I think could be helpful in terms of just understanding, both for organizations and for individuals. There's just such deep value in certain capabilities and internal kind of preferences and even skills that people have. And what we found, like if I go back like full circle to that study that I shared earlier, what we saw was also that people who are high on optimism and who are already high on resilience, like they're more optimistic, they're more resilient, those people are actually coping better, just on average. They are coping better. So they're sleeping better, 38% better than their counterparts who are less optimistic or less resilient. These people are also more active. Naturally, like they are engaging more. 18%, I think, is what we found there. 18% more active than those who are lower in optimism and resilience. And they are actually, interestingly enough, showing higher rates of social support. So you're optimistic, you're resilient, you end up then sleeping better, you're more active, and you're probably doing some of this reaching out for yourself to your social networks to keep that up for yourself. So it's this fascinating cycle, and I think it should give us all hope. Like develop the resilience and the optimism in people, and these other things will fall into place because we develop these other skills that we can engage in other activities.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, probably
great place to think that. Go ahead, Renee.
No, I think I was going to maybe say something similar. Like it's like a lovely place to kind of tie it up, because those were things that you knew were important, and I'm sure you were helping and stressing with your members before this happened. And then it's critical now, and no matter what the future looks like, it's going to be critical then. Like it really just speaks to, I think, kind of the core, like you were saying, foundation of the importance of the optimism and the resilience to effectively managing life, whatever you're doing.
Right. Exactly. It's like this core psychological capital that you really need. Like you need that in your bank so that you can manage through these other situations, and you can even build skills on top of it. But you need those things like foundationally. And oftentimes in coaching, that's where we start with folks who are struggling more with like the stress management, the burnout, like you have to start with the psychological capital, and then you build onto that.
I really like that phrase, the psychological capital. I feel like that would resonate with people who maybe in general are not so accustomed to wanting to feel in touch with feelings or or all of that might sound a little too warm and fuzzy for them, but thinking about it as psychological capital makes it sound more like an important place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to give Marty Seligman the credit for.
Yeah, no, right, yes.
But go Marty.
Yes.
Well, Maya, I can't thank you enough for joining and sharing everything that you have. We've probably talked for longer, and there's a lot more I'm sure you can share. So how can people get in touch with you and learn more?
Absolutely. I think I would welcome if this was interesting to you, you want to learn more, you just want to chat, you need a virtual coffee chat with someone, feel free to email me at maya.garza@betterup.co. You can, of course, go to our website, betterup.com. And I would welcome folks, go there on the resource page. We've actually created quite a few resource kits. You don't have to be a member, you don't have to be a client of BetterUp, but there's resource kits in there about like how do you work from home, how do you maintain those social connection, how do you manage through the chaos and the uncertainty. So there's lots of resources that we've put together for HR professionals, for I-Os who are consulting internally or externally, and even for individuals to leverage. And I'd welcome folks, please take advantage of that. We say like our mission is to help people live lives with clarity, purpose, and passion, and whatever helps you do that, we're happy to support it.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to see everybody contributing and help using our collective knowledge as a field for industrial or organizational psychologists to use it for good during this time. So glad you all are doing it, and thanks again for sharing with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you. So fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.